Okay, here we go everyone for our next lecture. This one is going to be on shape design. So a lot of this class, for most of our assignments, we will be designing shapes. We will be designing shapes, abstract shapes. We will be designing representational shapes. We will be designing shapes that feel happy, shapes that feel scary, shapes that have a sense of motion, all these different things. But to start, let's just discuss here what is a shape and what is shape design. Okay. All right. So we talked about line last time. So now we're going to talk about shapes. So our basic shapes are triangle, circle, and rectangle. Those are all our most simple shapes. Those are the shapes we learned in elementary school. And all of those kind of have inherent properties that you can use. So normally that is kind of a good place to start when you're thinking about designing stuff. Start with those simple shapes. We can also make more complex shapes. So here are some more complex shapes. Organic looking shapes, angular shapes, whatever it may be. You can start to combine these different, the basic shapes into more unique ones. Okay, so basically that is any sort of shape right there. Okay. So let's think of this a different way. Shape versus form. Okay, so shape is going to be one of the most important things as we are designing our compositions. So shapes are two-dimensional, 2D shapes, and forms are three-dimensional. Okay? And since we are working in two-dimensional mediums, either drawing in a sketchbook or creating art on a computer screen, all our artwork is flat and has only two dimensions. So that's why that shape design is always going to take priority in a composition more than form. So form is three-dimensional. So let's look at a three-dimensional form. You guys may have drawn something like this before, the 3D cube, right? Yes, the 3D cube. Another good word to think about shape is silhouette. Silhouette is a really good way to think about it. So, if that is the three-dimensional form of this cube, what is that two-dimensional shape? Okay, so all I have to do is fill this in solid black. Okay, here we go. I don't need this to be perfect right this second. So now you can see as I fill this in black, I get rid of those lines, these lines basically here, that help to show that it's a three-dimensional form. And once I get rid of those, now all we have left is this two-dimensional shape. Okay, so we want to try and see, even if we want to draw something that's three-dimensional, all these three-dimensional things, when it's a drawing of something three-dimensional, it's an illusion. This is not literally a three-dimensional cube because it's still on my computer screen, or if you're drawing along with this, which you should be in your sketchbook, this is an illusion of a three-dimensional cube. It's still flat on your paper. So that's why even if we're drawing this or we're looking at it, we want to think about it like it's a two-dimensional shape. Okay, so you can do this for all the simple shapes. We can draw a sphere. I can put some like hatching here, different shading techniques to make this appear three-dimensional. Add in a little shadow underneath here. A little more hatching. So a lot of art classes, you learn how to make things look three-dimensional. So if you've ever taken, just a basic still life drawing class, or you've drawn things just for yourself in your sketchbook, a lot of times you're trying to make something look 3D. And even if you're trying to make something look 3D, you want to make sure that it's a good, well-designed shape. Okay? So again, shape here. There's a form version of it. Again, if we're drawing this, if we're looking at it in someone else's artwork, you still want to prioritize that shape and make sure your shape is clear to the viewer. Do the same thing with a cylinder. You guys can probably see where this is going at this rate. Okay. So that's the biggest difference. Shape versus form. The shape is flat, two-dimensional, and the form is a three-dimensional, basically illusion. Okay. Shape versus form. And also shape versus details. I know a lot of people, especially artists starting out, have they want to create a drawing that has lots of cool details in it. Lots of cool details. Those details can be different things, small details. It can be details that help explain or show that this is a three-dimensional form. So right now, I'm going to be drawing kind of a clock tower type thing here. So here I'm drawing it. We got details in here right now. We have details showing that it's three-dimensional. We have details, so the different lines are showing that it's a three-dimensional form. I can put some shading, becomes a detail. So I can put some shading here to have a light side and a shadow side. I can put some textural details on here, so showing that this is made out of brick. Getting a little bit insight into the texture there. Architectural details, little designs and patterns and things like that. But even if I want to draw something like this, or if I'm looking at another piece of artwork that has a bunch of details in it, I still want to be able to not get distracted by all the details, not get distracted by the three-dimensional form of it. What I want to do is try to see in my mind just that flat 2D shape. So I'm going to redraw this just as a silhouette. Okay, and hopefully you can see and you can tell what something is with no details. Okay, so that will kind of be a good judge if your shape is working or not. Can I fill in that shape with, fill it in as a solid black silhouette, and can you still tell what it is? Okay. Can I still tell that this is a clock tower, even if it's a silhouette? Well, I may not be able to tell that there's a clock on there, but I have a good general gist of what this shape is. So usually when I'm drawing or I'm designing a composition, when I'm coming up with an idea for something, you want to think about your composition just seeing the flat shapes. And oftentimes you want to just draw the shapes first, and then depending on what you're doing with this drawing. If this was just a very quick, like 5-minute sketch of a building or less, I might not go past a silhouette. But if it's a project that I'm going to take into more of a finish and spend more time on, I can always come back later and add on these details. Okay, but I don't necessarily need those details to tell what it is. So it's always a good way to judge your artwork and judge your shapes by filling in things to be a solid silhouette and see if you can still tell what that is. Okay? So that will lead us to, is it a good shape? So this is something I will be looking for in your in the artwork that you turn in. So is it a good shape? So let's do a drawing of a house. Okay, we'll have house examples in this class this quarter a few times. So we got our house here, got a little window or door there, got some windows, got a chimney there, a little texture here to show that the roof is made out of something different. Got the shingles up here on the roof. Some details there in the windows. Whatever else you may have for that house. So is that a fine drawing of a house? Sure, it's fine. It's not great. It's not horrible. But the main thing that's wrong with this is what? So again, I suggest you guys have your sketchbooks out while I'm doing all this stuff. If I'm drawing too quick for you, I would just say draw along with this and like kind of just pause the videos at different points to see. So you can draw along and understand, because you're going to understand the concepts much better if you're sketching along with me. Okay, so when I look at this, if you were turning this, if this was part of a composition or part of a drawing you turned in, I would ask myself and I would ask you, is this a good shape? Well, how do we tell? Let's fill this in as a silhouette. Okay, I'm filling this in, filling it in. Okay, is this a good shape? Can I tell if someone gave me a drawing with this silhouette shape in there? Could I tell that this is a house? I mean, maybe I could if there was some more context and we put people walking in the door and a car outside, then I could tell. But ultimately, if someone turned that in, it just kind of looks like a rectangle, two rectangles stacked on top of each other. So no, I would say this is not a very good shape there. So what I would suggest for you to do is redraw your house in a way that has a better silhouette shape. So what I want to do, I want to draw this from more of an angle where I can see that angle of the roof. I can see that triangle shape on top a little bit more. Okay, I want to see that cut in and see that lower part. So already this is going to be a more descriptive silhouette. Okay. And what will really help is taking this chimney and having it break and create a more interesting silhouette. If I put the chimney up here, now we will have a more interesting silhouette. Okay, I can still put my windows and my doors and the details on there, but the details aren't giving information to the viewer. The viewer is going to look at your shapes first, and they are going to get a lot of information from your shapes. Okay. You want your shapes to be clear and to really communicate to the viewer. And what the viewer is going to look at and going to use to communicate are the shape design. So are the shapes in your composition designed well, where someone can very quickly and easily recognize what those silhouette shapes are. We never want to confuse our viewer. We never want our viewer to have to guess what they're looking at. We never want the viewer to try and have to study your drawing to really see what it is. So there, now that is a much better silhouette shape there. You could add like little bushes here to further help that thing. You could put some smoke coming from the chimney, and that would just make it a more, push that shape further. But really, so those shapes are going to be read quickly by the viewers. Those shapes are going to be read quickly and communicate to the viewer. So we want to communicate clearly and effectively to the viewer using shape to do that. Details are cool, details are nice, but that is not the main thing that will quickly communicate to a viewer, okay? All right, let's look at this example too. This is two artists. So this top version here, this is a comic book artist named Jim Lee. He's worked for Marvel and DC, worked on a lot of the biggest titles out there. So you can see this image is overloaded with tons and tons of details. Okay, we got folds of the clothing or the cape. We got details in the clothing, details, facial expressions, tons of details in the background. Okay, but when we look at a complicated pieces of artwork like this, we want to try and switch our brains so we see this version of it, okay? So I just made this version here by tracing over all the basic shapes. So we have the main big abstract shape. For Batman, we have other, try to simplify all this background stuff into the main shapes. Okay, same for this one. So this is a painting by Claude Monet, French Impressionist artist. And then here I traced over all the basic shapes here. So as you can see, the main idea of the composition stays the same. Okay, so we still have more angular shapes here, a lot of diagonals. It's a busier composition because it's all filled up. Kind of has a sense of movement to it because of all the diagonals there. So a lot of those big things are still communicated the same, even when we just have those simple shapes. Same with this one. This one, the shapes are almost recognizable as boats. It's a more calm composition. There's smaller shapes in here, and there's a big area of negative space up here. That's just empty space. We'll come back to this later on, but I can introduce it. Negative space. Okay, so fundamentally, these compositions are not that much different. All we do is eliminate all the busy stuff, the details. We eliminate the shading that turns it into three-dimensional forms. We eliminate the color. So even if you're looking at a complicated piece of artwork, it's helpful to try and force yourself to see it and see just the basic shapes. And especially if you're going to draw a complicated piece of artwork, first you want to figure out those basic shapes to make sure it's working and make sure it's clear to your viewer, and then you can always add on details afterwards. It's a lot harder to, fix a bad composition by adding details. You're going to fix a bad composition by adjusting the silhouette of your major shapes. Alright, so that's kind of the basics of what a shape is, flat, two-dimensional. Again, I suggest if you didn't do it this first time through the viewing, go back and kind of sketch these examples in your sketchbook. We will have a drawing challenge this week where you are creating a drawing just using silhouette shapes to help you guys wrap your head around that and get a better understanding. So let's look at a few artists that used shape really well in their drawings. So most subject matters I will bring in masterwork for us to study. So this is Eyvind Earle, if anyone has ever seen the movie Sleeping Beauty. Visually a very, very beautiful Disney animated film. I don't think the story quite holds up. I watched it recently, but I think the art is just stunning. So this is the artist Eyvind Earle. He was brought in to be a concept artist on this film, meaning he did a lot of preliminary artwork to help define the look of this. So look at how he drew those people. He was just using shape to draw those people. And even with no facial expressions, no fingers, no folds in the clothing, we get an idea of who these characters are and what they're doing. You get a sense of movement by how the shapes were designed. Really nice angular shapes here, sweeping smooth lines. The angle of the legs, the hair flowing really helps to give an idea of that. And when he was designing these other background shapes, he simplified these complicated tree shapes and organic shapes down to these kind of simple rectangles. Okay, so he does have details on here. He does have shading on here to make it look like a three-dimensional form, but ultimately it's still kind of based around a simple shape there, and he's just kind of putting those, you can tell he designed those shapes first and then added on some details. Here are some, I like the little plants in the foreground. You guys can use something like this if you ever have a scene that you may want to have in a forest for this class. These are just kind of two-dimensional shapes. He almost probably copy and pasted or like stamped them there. So Eyvind Earle, he heavily relies on shape. There's a few other here. Here's another one of his from the finale scene of the movie, the battle, fight scene at the end. Prince versus Dragon, but again, very simple, not a lot of details, not a lot of three-dimensional shading here. This guy's a complete silhouette. The dragon is almost all a silhouette. We just have a few details of like the scales on the belly and the eyes, but other than that, it's a silhouette. All these plants down here are just silhouette shapes. So really nicely designed work. Has anyone ever seen Batman the Animated Series? A very cool cartoon. Artist Bruce Timm designed this series. It came out in the early 90s, and there's been kind of different iterations of the show in this style after it. But look at the way Batman is designed. This came out at a time right after the 80s. They were doing, in the 80s the cartoons were a little too detailed and less shape-based. So he kind of invented this new slick design. But look at Batman here. The face has, you can count the shapes. One big shape for the head, 1, 2 shapes for the eyes, and then that third shape for the skin showing through this. So there's like 4 shapes for Batman's head. He doesn't need to put in details of wrinkles in the face or stubble on there or shading. Just the bare bones enough to communicate the idea. And his whole body, there's these little hints of shading, but it's kept super minimal and very simple. Okay, so it's the shapes that is doing the work in this art style. So you can kind of see a little bit of Eyvind Earle in his style as well. Here's another one. This is from the opening credits of the show, but really great example of a silhouette. You can tell who the character is, what the character is doing, without any details. So think of it like a cake. You build the main part of the cake first, and then details are the frosting that you put on top of the cake. Here's a logo from that show again, about 6 or 7 shapes to make a really dynamic, interesting logo. So if you design your shapes well, you may have no need for details if you really do a good job with that. This is the artist Marissa Ware. I went to art school with her. She's a very, very good artist. She's done some children's books. She kind of has 2 different styles. One is highly detailed with lots of little lines, and she uses a tiny little pin. But this here is kind of an example of her shape-based style, and I kind of like this style of hers better, just because of the simplicity of this. All these little decorative patterns around here are all just simple silhouettes. The fox is very flat, designed with just a few shapes, but it's a really interesting silhouette shape for the fox there, and just minimal amount of details to help add to the story. Here's another one of hers. Same idea, a lot of flat shapes around here. And yeah, so those are all artists that rely heavily on shape. So think about this. You may be an artist that relies more on line, that relies more on shape. But it's good to play around with line, good to play around with shape, and then that will kind of help to develop your own style as you work through different things. This is another Eyvind Earle. Okay, so that is it for today, or for this lecture. So take a look out. Make sure you watch this lecture first before doing the drawing challenge. The drawing challenge will be about creating a drawing just using silhouette shapes.